What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I would like to welcome you all to another edition of Wayne's Perspective, where we operate in discipline, decency, integrity, and respect. On this ninth day of April 2024, I hope everyone is doing okay. As for me, I'm doing pretty good, just working hard as usual, taking every day one day at a time. You know how I do. All right, so without further delay, we're going to go ahead and get into this particular video, which will be part three of the Trump effect. And this one is going to be titled Trump is Not a People Person. Before I get started, I just want to say I hope you all have been able to check out parts one and two. If you haven't, go ahead and do so and comment if you like. Um, and on this particular video, I think I mentioned this in part two. What this one is going to consist of is I'm going to read verbatim an article that I wrote back in 2020 on June 7th, which was not that long after the events that took place in Lafayette Square. I'm sure most of you all remember that. And I also touched on that in part two. So this was probably going to be my second time reading this verbatim to myself. And also, if it comes off like it's an actual research paper or something like that, mainly because it wasn't something that I had to turn in. But at this point, I was in the third year of going for my bachelor's degree in political science and government. So it does read like an actual research paper, complete with the references at the end and everything. So I'm going to read this verbatim, and at the end, I'm going to give my thoughts on everything with some additional thoughts. So without further delay, let me go ahead and bring this up, and I'll read this verbatim. And again, these are my thoughts, everything that I wrote at the time. And like I said, this will probably be my second time reading it out loud. So let me go ahead and share this with you all. Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and get this started. And like I said, I'm going to read this verbatim. Donald Trump is not a people person. June 7th, 2020. In 1995, President Bill Clinton consoled the families of those who lost loved ones in the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City on April 19th. President George W. Bush rallied a shocked nation days after the September 11th attacks, and emotional President Obama shed tears during a press conference days after the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, where most of the victims were children. A united nation looked to its president for leadership in tough times and consistent guidance in quiet times. Society wants the assurance that everything will be all right, but also wants its president to show empathy and sympathy in times where those emotions are required, not optional. Although I have been following politics since September 11th, 2001, it was the unfortunate results of the 2016 presidential election that not only caused me to follow all aspects of politics more closely than in the past, it also motivated me to pursue a career in politics with aspirations of running for state and federal office once I complete the academic part of my journey, which I'm still on at this point, just in a little bit of hiatus right now. But but this will not be about my future in politics. This will be about the current individual occupying the White House and the aspects of public perception. This piece will serve as a reflection in no order explaining why Donald J. Trump is not a people person and why that will never change. See if you notice a clear pattern as you read. COVID 19. In any other presidency, a pandemic of this magnitude would be a continuous priority of that president and his or her administration. However, this is the Trump administration we're talking about, where the priorities in place have never focused on what's best for the American people. Warnings from the outgoing Obama administration were ignored, no surprise there, and the irresponsible decision to close the National Security Council (NSC) flew under the proverbial radar, all leading to the most consequential early months of 2020. Two things continue to, excuse me, two things continue to stick out like a sore thumb for me. One, Trump saying at what would turn out to be one of his last rallies for a while, this is there, the new Democrats, this is there, the Democrats' new hoax. And two, his March 6th visit to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia. It was clear at this point which route Trump would go by taking such a dismissive tone concerning what would turn out to be a pandemic. Courtesy of Edward Lucy's article in the Financial Times, Inside Trump's Coronavirus Meltdown, Trump's 47-minute interaction with the press included some of his quote unquote greatest hits, comprised of dismissing CNN as fake news, boasting about his Fox News viewership, which may or may not have dwindled as you read this, cited the U.S. stock market's highs as of March 2020, referred to Washington State Democratic Governor Jay Inslee as a snake, and admitted he hadn't known that large numbers of people could die from ordinary flu. Okay. The level of incompetence and disinterest on display for the world to see was highly noticeable, which also produced some of the most combative, lie-laced press briefings in history. These briefings would hit the lowest of lows during the now infamous scene where he tried to recommend the human injection of bleach/disinfectant as a ridiculous way to cure the coronavirus. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end. Some decide to write this off as him joking. I'm going to touch on that too, or his words being taken out of context. But the false sincerity in his tone showed he was serious, and why Miss Deborah Burks did not immediately correct him and challenge him on the spot is something I and others still cannot explain. Imagine if those who worship him decided to load up a cup or glass with bleach and drink it as if it were a regular glass of water. Unprecedented cannot even begin to describe this behavior, and thankfully, there were no reports of mass human consumption of bleach in the United States. And when legit disinfecting companies have to come out and make statements essentially saying to not listen to the president of the United States in a case like this, you know something is wrong. Puerto Rico, September 20th, 2017, saw a Category 4 hurricane in the form of Maria hit Puerto Rico with such devastation that they are still recovering from 2.5 years later. To this day, words can't express the shape the territory was in when the hurricane was over. Now, in situations like this, a president will make sure all the necessary agencies, particularly the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, are equipped and ready to assist those in need, and Congress is prepared to initiate aid. However, it was clear during all of the coverage that Trump's priority were elsewhere. As noted by a September 29th, 2017 article in the Washington Post, Trump lashed out on social media and blamed the island's financial woes and ailing infrastructure for the difficult recovery process. In total contrast to what was happening on the ground, he declared that efforts to provide food, water, and medical care were doing well. This is typical Trump behavior, lashing out, blaming others, and presenting a narrative that is the precise opposite of reality. Another typical Trump antic is blaming those in leadership. In this case, San Juan's Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, saying she had poor leadership ability via a tweet, of course. Oh, and who could forget another infamous happening that turned out to be an epic fail? To show that he was helping the Puerto Rican people, he threw rolls of toilet paper into a crowd. It remains one of the most insensitive things I've ever seen. Imagine experiencing a dangerous natural disaster only to be told that your territory doesn't matter as much as others, being blamed in the process for what's taking place, and your citizens being on the receiving end of incoming paper towels as a showing of assistance. Wow. California wildfires. A fire of any kind can take a devastating toll on a family, no matter their race, income level, marital status, or actual location. However, when wildfires take place, most commonly in the state of California, the level of devastation is even more widespread, no pun intended. In November 2018, the northern part of the state was unfortunately subject to another brutal wave of wildfires, and according to an NBC News article, at least 25 people were killed as fires burned more than 83,000 acres and leveling at least 177 homes. Now, in a difficult situation like this, one immediate thing that should come from a responsible president and his or her administration is, my administration is following the unfortunate wildfires in the state of California. Rest assured that the nation is with you and you will be provided with all of the assistance needed to get through this. Well, as mentioned, empathy and sympathy were never part of Trump's playbook as president. Not surprisingly, via tweet no less, he mostly blamed California for poor management and threatened to cut off federal aid. So the wildfires were their fault. Oh yeah, that's right. California was one of many states that went for Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential election, as well as being a blue state with a Democratic governor. So this was Trump's form of petty and irresponsible payback. Representative Adam Schiff correctly noted that Trump's response to the California wildfires showed how little he understands the job. Imagine your state not voting for a presidential candidate, the other candidate wins. when you're experiencing one of the worst natural disasters ever known, this person casts blame and does everything but offer assistance, plus recommending a need to plug the rivers and clear the trees, according to Trump. Was that another joke during a time of crisis? Voting. Voting is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. Without it, freedom is pointless. As an African American man, I fully understand the importance of voting and will always recognize how my people and other forts, recognize how my people and others fought and died for our right to vote. It's something that should be valued, protected, and never taken for granted. When I became when I become an elected official in state and federal government, this is one of many things I will bring out that I will bring out. Okay, I think that was a typo there on my end. Let me do that again. When I become an elected official in state and federal government, this will be one of many things that will bring out my passionate side. Okay, so you can imagine my reaction and a host of others when Trump claimed without a shred of evidence that there was voter fraud before and after the 2016 presidential election. A 2017 article courtesy of factcheck.org truly broke down how Trump's claims were false and misleading to the public. He claimed millions of people voted illegally, that you have people registered to vote in two states, they vote twice, apparently not aware or dismissive of a 2012 Pew report that found 2.75 million people were registered in more than one state, with four members of his cabinet or staff being part of that list, plus no evidence of anyone voting twice. That if you look at they, if you look at it, they fraudulent voters all voted for Hillary, and no one to this day is sure where he got those numbers from. That if dead people are registered to vote and voting, which they do, which were sporadic cases. I'm all but certain that there are countless absurd claims made by Trump regarding voter fraud. His claims led to the creation of a now defunct Voting Integrity Commission led by Vice President Mike Pence and then Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, which did not find any instances of widespread voter fraud, not one. More recently, he claimed without evidence that Nevada and Michigan, which happens to be two swing states with Democratic governors, were planning to send out illegal vote by mail ballots, along with the threat again to withhold funding, which he cannot legally do. As noted in a May 20th, 2020 article by David A. Graham in The Atlantic, the stated purpose here via a memo was to secretly and illegally cut off all federal funding to two key swing states with the goal of rigging turnout in favor of the president's party in the 2020 election. Imagine an incoming president who continuously complained about fraud even after an election that he or she won and would stop at nothing to manipulate and mislead the public into thinking that the Democrats perpetrate something like voter fraud, but behind closed doors is done all to help his side. Healthcare. It still boggles my mind that Trump and those in the GOP campaigned on a promise to repeal and replace Obamacare. And for the record, I'm an Obama supporter. I'll admit that, even though I have my criticisms too. But I just wish they stopped calling it Obamacare and call it what it is, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. It's that simple. And of course, not having anything resembling a replacement on the books. I will not rehash the history of the GOP's obsession with dismantling one of the signature domestic achievements of former President Barack Obama. Still, the mere thought of kicking millions of people off of their health insurance, and again without a replacement, should be of the gravest concern to everyone. Paul Kane put it best in his May 16th, 2020 Washington Post article. Now faced with a viral pandemic that has driven more than, at the time, 36 million workers to file unemployment claims in 8 weeks, Republicans found themselves heading into an election season still lacking any health plan. I and many others have long came to the conclusion that one, the Republicans never had a replacement, and two, Trump never had an alternative, and his push to repeal and replace was another action taken to stick it to Obama. As of this writing, the entire issue will likely come down to a historic Supreme Court decision that would determine the constitutional fate of the Affordable Care Act, and I believe they did keep it on the books via their ruling. Imagine a president of any party willing to throw millions of people off their health insurance, including many who have voted for him or her, with no plan to succeed the current law or even attempt to approve it, all to stick it to their predecessor. Food stamps. Another thing that boggles my mind is when a president or any elected official wants to cut the funding of programs that help people in need, sometimes drastically. There is never a good time to decrease the funding of programs that help low income families. It is also worse when the attempt is made either during a supposed strong economy or a pandemic. A July 23rd, 2019 CBS News article highlighted the administration's views on this type of assistance. An ignorant claim made from the Republican side was that many of its beneficiaries don't need such assistance given the strong economy, but states have misused this flexibility without restraint, said Department of Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. For the record, the loophole Perdue was referring to was 43 states allowing families who qualify for the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Program, also known as TANF, to receive food stamp benefits automatically. The rationale for wanting to decrease this funding is bad enough, but how do they know beneficiaries don't need such assistance and a lack of restraint on behalf of the states? Is there any evidence to support any of this, specifically regarding the states? Have they talked to any constituents about their financial situations? Most likely not, but is another shameful move on a list of them doing this Trump era. And speaking of outrageous, that describes the same behavior during the pandemic. Another CBS News article noted that even during the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, the administration still wanted to cut food stamps, citing the Department of Agriculture's appeal of a court ruling that blocked imposing additional work requirements to qualify for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, on poor adults without children. The positive aspect here is that Congress still expanded benefits by the positive aspect here is that Congress still expanded benefits via the stimulus bills passed earlier this year, including $16 billion dollars in additional funding for SNAP. But imagine a group of individuals wanting to cut food stamps, which would directly affect millions of low income Americans because this same group assumes they don't need such assistance. Amazing. DACA on June 15th, 2012. President Obama announced and signed via executive order the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals DACA program, intended to help those individuals brought to the United States as children, yes, illegally, but you don't blame the child. The constitutionality of the law has been discussed and debated in the annals of government for quite some time, including Trump's first Attorney General Jeff Sessions, remember him, claiming the Department of Justice cannot defend this overreach. You see, when a Republican is president, there's no such thing as overreach. However, if the president is a Democrat, everything is overreach. Amazing. In an ABC News article discussing the court case stemming from Trump's decision to end the program, the federal appeals court ruled the Trump administration acted in an arbitrary and capricious manner when it sought to end an Obama era program that shields young Americans from deportation. It is no surprise that this decision was appealed, like most court decisions that rightfully challenged this administration. And as of this writing, the Supreme Court is expected to rule on the case in the summer of 2020. I believe DACA is still on the books. I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if the court ever ruled on that or if it was put on the back burner somewhere. I have to check that out. Imagine you as a child came to this country through no fault of your own, likely because your parent or parents wanted a better life. Still, others are chomping at the bit to see you deported because of a false narrative surrounding your family's race and status. Tax returns. We heard the excuses given by Trump and his allies. I refer to them as worshipers, leading up to the 2016 presidential election and even several months after the fact. I'm under audit. This was the lame excuse Trump gave any time when asked about presenting his tax returns, breaking with the tradition that every president has participated in as far back as Richard Nixon. There are two notable points here. One, the Internal Revenue Service IRS stated Trump would be permitted to release his returns even while under audit. And two, Kellyanne Conway would later make it a non-issue, ridiculously claiming that Trump's election meant he didn't have to show anything. No matter what the excuse was, it is clear to anyone with an observant eye that Trump has something to hide. Otherwise, he would have presented them by now. This is another case where the Supreme Court is expecting to rule on, which will likely determine the overall credibility of the judicial branch and the oversight powers of the legislative branch. And I believe they did rule that his tax returns would be made public or something like that. He couldn't hide them any longer, so they did rule on that. Think about this for a second. Obama was seemingly pressured to show his birth certificate, primarily due to the racist and nonsensical ramblings of Trump. He complied and called Trump out on it, which I always said this was the moment Trump decided to run for president. And remember, I made that clear in part two. Trump has been called on repeatedly to show his tax returns, and he still refuses to comply. Furthermore, imagine what the response would be from Trump, the right wing, Fox News, and the GOP members of Congress if Obama or any Democrat president refused to show their tax returns. Need I say more? Yeah, they wouldn't be able to shut up about it. But I digress. The environment. One of the main priorities of any administration is the protection of the environment. Well, the Trump administration has preferences, and it is the opposite of protecting the environment that directly affects the American people. The New York Times compiled an extensive list which still receives updates titled "The Trump Administration is Reversing 100 Environmental Rules." The introductory sentence noted that after 3 years in office, the Trump administration has dismantled most of the major climate and environmental policies the president promised to undo. For those concerned about any aspects of the environment, those promises made by Trump and this list should be alarming. However, they were cheered without any additional credible context provided. One noteworthy example from the list was number 11, weakened oversight of some state plans for reducing air pollution in national parks. Americans love parks, right? So will we be more or less likely to visit any park where air pollution is present? How can this possibly be good for the environment? Is destroying the environment worth sticking it to Barack Obama and Bill Clinton? LaDavid Johnson. I want to share this section by sending my condolences to the family of LaDavid Johnson. With the rapid pace of news, even in October 2017, we seemingly just moved on after his death. As you read on, you will notice why I decided to focus on Mr. Johnson as opposed to titling the section Military Families. Losing a son, daughter, or any relative in the military can be a traumatic experience for obvious reasons. However, one thing a president is tasked with is consoling the families of those who were lost in battle and ensuring constant, consistent support. Leave it to Mr. Trump to bungle this opportunity like so many others. The Atlantic's David A. Graham explained this in a simple yet effective form in his October 18th, 2017 article stating he botched the call badly enough that he left Johnson's widow in tears and his mother feeling disrespected. Following that up with, the president cannot be both the foremost patriot and the utmost consoler while at the same time dragging his feet on calls and angering military families. Although Trump denied the widows and Representative Frederica Wilson's account of the call, it was no surprise how he acted during the call, even down to not remembering Mr. Johnson's name and saying he knew what he signed up for. And remember the ridiculous press conference then Chief of Staff John Kelly gave, trying to call out Ms. Wilson and making false claims in the process? The less said about it, the better. Imagine losing a loved one in the military, and the one person who could make all the difference in terms of elected leadership fails to console you. Charlottesville. I recall a few people saying that Charlottesville was the defining moment of Trump's presidency, and even though there have been other instances since October 2017 that may have eclipsed this in terms of impact, I still tend to agree. This was also in my state of Virginia, resulting in more personal feelings about what took place that day. I remember waking up on the morning of Saturday, August 12th, 2017, and turning on CNN, seeing the clash that culminated in the Unite the Right rally. I also remember sitting at my laptop that day, not only shaking my head at what I was seeing, but asking myself, are we in 2017 or 1967? I later texted my mom and said, quote unquote, what a sad day in America. And she replied, I know, son. I still fail to understand how the planned removal of Confederate statue affects so many people, especially those outside of Virginia. I mean, to put it bluntly, what is it to you? Before then Governor Terry McAuliffe would make a statement, I still had my TV on CNN watching a broadcast hosted by Anna Cabrera. She's now with MSNBC. I want to say the panel consisted of 3 or 4 people, including Mrs. Cabrera, and what stunned but did not surprise me was one of the panelists, an obvious Trump worshiper who was already trying to defend the behavior of the white nationalists. And of course, in appalling instances like this, the next question we are tempted to ask is, where's the president? Well, we certainly got him that day, and comments that are still mentioned to this day and prompted presumptive Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden to run for president Trump tried to equate the counter protesters with the white supremacists, infamously saying there were good people on both sides. This very comment told us all we needed to know regarding Trump's viewpoint on the matter, which was fully confirmed during a press conference days later at Trump Tower. It was also one of the first instances in a country looking to the president for leadership and not getting it. CNN's Chris Cillizza summed this up perfectly when he said, quote, "What Trump is doing here is preemptively absolving himself of the blame for creating a political climate in the country in which people like these Unite the Right demonstrators feel emboldened enough to rally in public," unquote. There was also one person killed during the rally. Rest in peace, Heather Heyer. And again, it was not surprising when it was reported that Trump did not contact Miss Heyer's mother, nor was he invited to the funeral. With hindsight being 2020, maybe not attending the funeral was a smart decision. The last thing a grieving public needed was the focus to turn to Trump and how he was going to behave, which has sadly happened. It is not about him. Kids in cages. Fear mongering is one surefire way to motivate people to vote in specific ways, even if it is against their own best interest. It also motivates people when you cast another group of people as evil, thugs, rapists, bringing crime, etc. Trump's policies are nothing short of insulting, for lack of a better word. We can also add insensitive, immoral, and unethical to the list when we reflect on his policy to separate kids from their families, which then led to kids being placed in cages. Insensitive is also a key word when worshipers of Trump would defend the practice of saying something along the lines of, well, they shouldn't have come here illegally or they shouldn't have broke the law. Never mind the fact that they are trying to escape the horrible living conditions present in their countries. As part of her written testimony on July 11, 2019, before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, senior researcher Clara Long described in depth the treatment at the border, focusing on the inhumane conditions at the border, lack of adult caregivers, hygiene and health conditions, lengths of stay, inadequate efforts to release and reunite children, and the separation from family members. She also presented recommendations that should be taken up via legislation, stating that Congress should write child rights protections into law and provide proper oversight. This hasn't been in the news as much due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the civil social unrest in the country. Additional focus should be placed on what's happening at the border. It has, along with congressional action that will prohibit such practices in the future. Well, we saw what that got us earlier this year. The press. To say that labeling the press as the enemy of the people is dangerous is quite an understatement, and this point has been made literally since Trump first uttered those words, especially with complete indifference, ignorance, and or disregard for the First Amendment. To be fair to Trump, in the smallest sense of the word, he has at best a love and hate relationship with the media. If the coverage is favorable to him, he's ecstatic. If the coverage is unfavorable to him, he lashes out in a childlike fashion never seen in a president. Two instances that come to mind both involve the respected Jim Acosta at CNN. Remember the January 11th press conference where Trump, still the president-elect at that point, shouted down Acosta, not allowing him to ask his question while calling him fake news? It was one of the more tense exchanges for an incoming president you'll ever see. The second one may be forgotten, but spoke volumes at the time it happened. During the November 7th, 2018 press conference, amid calling Acosta a very rude person and chastising him for how he treated then press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and others, a White House staffer attempted to take his microphone away, which was unheard of and unprecedented for all the wrong reasons, a clear case of trying to censor the media. I will never forget the image of the staffer trying to take his microphone. You'll notice Trump resorts to name calling when he's not getting his way and when he's being challenged, which brings us to women journalists. Molly Jong Fast, April 22nd, 2020 article in Daily Beast accurately quoted, "Maybe the former reality TV host feels a little threatened by tough women who don't follow the script the way women should." The article goes on to mention notable examples of his exchanges with CBS News's, I just call him Miss Jane, and PBS's Yamiche Alcindor, as well as the reason why he was rude to reporters to excite and delight his base. There are more examples, such as his interactions with April Ryan and other women of color. If you find insulting reporters to be some form of entertainment, that says a lot, and I'm not even trying to be judgmental when I say that. Part of the media's job is to hold elected officials, especially the president, accountable. And if you're indifferent to that, you're in the wrong profession. Joe Scarborough. I wonder what Joe Scarborough and his wife Mika Brzezinski think at this point after initially supporting Trump and giving him valuable airtime on their platform. It is also a typical Trump tactic to embrace someone at first, yet when he's justifiably criticized and condemned for his behavior, a president of the United States, mind you, he goes on the attack with gratuitous name calling and indulging in the worst possible conspiracy theories in the face of strong evidence that contradicts everything he says. Case in point, when Scarborough was a Republican member of Congress in Florida, one's congressional district, Lloyd Cossidus, I believe that's how you pronounce it, an aide who worked for Scarborough at the time, and pardon me if I butchered that name, died on July 20th, 2001, due to a fatal fall in his office. Salvador Rizzo's fact checker analysis in the Washington Post on May 12th, 2020, laid out some of the most significant aspects surrounding her death. Namely, authorities never suspected foul play, and her death was not an unsolved mystery or a cold case waiting for answers, as well as the conclusion of the medical examiner. In the face of this and other overwhelming evidence, leaving Trump to accuse Scarborough of murder and ignorantly suggest that the case be reopened on Twitter, of course. Although Joe and Mika addressed this on their Morning Joe program, you can't help but wonder how they feel off the record when they're subject to this behavior from Trump and those who worship him. A few people have mentioned that once Trump is no longer president, Scarborough should sue him for defamation of character, and I agree 100%. And I don't believe that Scarborough ever sued him. Religion. With the COVID-19 pandemic, millions of Americans unemployed, a not so impressive economy, dwindling poll numbers, and growing civil unrest, all of this would keep a normal president up at night and force him or her to get their collective priorities in order. But almost towards the end of this post, you'll still recognize this is Donald Trump. The man is so concerned with his image and perception that he'll put American citizens in harm's way to achieve such a goal. Clearing out a peaceful protest complete with misuse of law enforcement and using religion as a political tactic, all in the name of a photo op to make you appear strong to the world, is the lowest of lows for this presidency, and that brings us full circle. The bottom line: the failure to adequately protect the public before and during a pandemic, blaming cities and countries for circumstances beyond their control, threatening to withhold federal funds when you have no authority to do so, falsely claiming the first African American president wasn't born in the United States, falsely claiming massive voter fraud, making a promise to repeal a popular yet flawed healthcare law with no plan to replace it, the desire to cut food stamps, even amid a pandemic, refusal to serve your tax returns, the desire to deport thousands of dreamers who were brought here through no fault of their own, falsely accusing someone of murder, implementing policies that harm the environment, equating counter protesters' actions with those of neo Nazis, claiming a peaceful protest was with assistance from law enforcement, politicizing religion and the military, referring to the press as the enemy of the people, doubling down on separating children from their families, and the failure to console grieving families, all makes the title of this piece very clear. Donald Trump is not a people person. Outside of people deemed necessary, I do not think I've ever seen Trump interact with any private citizen, especially at his rallies. They may think his over the top performances are due to an enthusiasm for the people. In fact, he's doing just that, performing, giving the public impression that he's a man of the people. But when the lights and microphones are off, he likely harbors disdain for those same people who will probably be shocked to learn that and will probably still support him anyway to own the libs. Make no mistake about it, if you're not a people person, you should not be president of the United States. And at the end, I show my references here, you know, and as you can see, I was in full school mode at this moment. And you can disregard the Twitter. I no longer have that Twitter. I still have the Facebook though. Yeah, so that brings us here. That article spoke volumes. I really don't have too much to say about it because it said everything verbatim, even with me stumbling across the way. But as I continue to say, I'm still new with the YouTube thing. So I'll continue on with my ending thoughts. I just want to make 4 additional points here, bringing everything full circle once again to 2024. Now, everyone knows about this guy's criminal case, and I don't get any kind of nickname for him. In this case, Teflon Trump. This guy's not Teflon. He's not John Gotti. He's not the second coming of John Gotti. John Gotti had his issues, and he was held accountable. Excuse me, he was held accountable for his actions, and rightfully so. But this is not the same thing with Trump. And for anybody to say that he operates like a gangster, I mean, come on now. Trump would have sunk the mafia in one fell swoop quicker than John Gotti ever did. So there's nothing Teflon about him. And are we seriously entertaining the thought and the notion that he's going to walk away from all these charges scot-free? Not likely. We still have yet to see what happens, but in my view, he's not. I mean, to beat every single charge when it's almost 90 of them, no way. No way in the world. And speaking of which, that brings me to another point, the perfect presidency. Now, not only was Trump not perfect, Joe Biden is not perfect. Barack Obama was not perfect. George W. Bush was not perfect. Bill Clinton was not perfect. Ronald Reagan was not perfect. George H.W. Bush was not perfect. Jimmy Carter was not perfect. Richard Nixon was not perfect. Gerald Ford was not perfect. John F. Kennedy was not perfect. You see my points here? No president ever was perfect. No president will ever be perfect. But apparently that went out the window with Trump, because apparently whatever he said, it was right. Whatever he did was right. He could never make no mistakes, could never do no wrong. So apparently throughout all this history, the moment he comes into office, that's when we had a perfect president. Everybody else had flaws, but he didn't. I call BS on that. And to find some people would try to argue that point, is real mind-boggling. Just because he says it doesn't make it right. Just because he make all sorts of hand gestures doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it smart either. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Another point that I wanted to throw in there is I seen people, or should I say I've heard people say that people didn't start going after him until after he became president. Okay, let me back up a little bit here. There was one podcast I listened to last year. I'm not going to name the name, but there was a guy on there. He was a brother, and they were talking about something regarding politics, and kind of nonchalantly but still serious at the same time. This guy said, and this is a direct quote, "I hope he get back in for real," And I shook my head, and then after a while, I just stopped listening to that podcast. Now, granted, everybody has their opinions, but it's just the way that he said it just made me shake my head, and I was done with that. I hope he get in. I hope he get back in for real. Like, in my red man voice, whatever, man. But I'm here to debunk that notion that they didn't start coming after him until he became president. Okay, newsflash. Prior to his presidency, the guy was already in the news. So even if he hadn't become president, more than likely these things, they probably would have came out. It was only the fact of him becoming president that you made yourself more visible in the process. So, and I believe it was Michelle Obama said that something along the lines of the presidency shows who you are, and that's exactly what it did here. So had he not ran for president, we probably would still be talking about it in some form now. It's just that him becoming president and doing those entire 4 years without being ousted, it only made things more visible. So you got nobody to blame but yourself on this one. And that brings me to my last point. Dictator for a day. Now, some people would write this off as a joke. Everything is a damn joke. Was it a joke when he suggested that we ingest bleach to combat COVID-19? Was it a joke when he suggested to a room full of cops that when they're detaining suspects to not only rough them up, but don't be too nice in the process? Was that a joke then? And as we've seen during that whole period, the cops did just that. But let that sort of talk come from Obama or a Democrat, specifically Obama. If that talk would have came from him, then cops in droves probably would have resigned or probably would have protested that, because, oh my gosh, this is conduct becoming of a president. I want no part of it. I know what I signed up for. I know what my oath of office for, and it is not to rough up suspects. Yeah, we would have got that. Now, to be clear, some of those cats probably would have, you know, championed Obama and said that he was being tough. But let's keep it real. The majority of them, they wouldn't have stood for that. But apparently, when it comes from somebody like Trump, it doesn't matter because we expect him to act and talk reckless, but we expect somebody like Obama or another Democrat to act with decency, right? Right. Okay. So, with all that being said, oh no, I'm not ending it right there. The dictator for a day. So, does anybody think he was playing when he said that? Does anybody really think that he would relinquish such power on after the first day? I mean, come on now. And I think back to, I believe it was 2017 when there was some type of gathering somewhere, and this woman, who was a white woman, a white elderly woman, she happily, entertained the thought about one to live in a dictatorship or one to know what it would be like to live in a dictatorship. And I believe some people were clapping after that. And not only did I shake my head and do the face palm, but then I was thinking, okay, do you have any idea what it would be like to, live in a dictatorship? Do you even know what a dictatorship is? Do you know what happens in dictatorships? Do you know what breeds a dictatorship? Obviously not, because you wouldn't make such she wouldn't have made such an asinine comment. But I guess in this case, the thinking would probably be they're not going to be a dictator to us. They're going to be a dictator to them. That's probably what the thinking was, right? Right. Unbelievable. But at any rate, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of part 3 of the Trump effect. I hope you're still with me. And if you still are, I appreciate that. Stay tuned for part 4. Part 4 will be up, if not this week, maybe next week. And that's basically going to deal with the people who went to jail and were held accountable for their actions on January 6th. And I got an article lined up for that one. So stay tuned for that one. Other than that, if you want to be part of Team Discipline, feel free to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and share this with everyone you know to get the word out. I appreciate you listening and taking the time. And 2 things before I leave. Number 1, the power of the mind is valuable. And number 2, there's nothing worse than power in the hands of fools. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take